All right, everybody. What I will point your attention to just before we start here, we have some quick FAQs for the webinar. So we definitely encourage questions. We want this to be an interactive and very inclusive webinar. We would love discussion. So all that we would ask is that you stay muted during the initial presentation portion, and we'll leave quite a lot of time, as much as half of our allotted time at the end, for questions and discussion. And please put those questions in the webinar chat. You should see buttons for that at the bottom of your screen. Our moderator will take good care of those questions, and we'll kind of queue them up in the order in which they come in. If you'd prefer to make a comment rather than using the chat, use the comment button at the bottom of your screen. And as I mentioned, time for Q&A and live discussion is going to be allotted at the end of the presentation. And also, if you're looking for those audio-video controls, which are very important, especially your mute-unmute, that's in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. The default setting is muted, and your video control default setting is off. All right, so let us go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to Meet the Personas. And my name is Sarah Gonzalez. I'm a data librarian at the Galter Health Sciences Library and Learning Center at Northwestern University. And I am the manager of the CD2H's Personas project. Thank you for joining me today to learn more about the personas and how you can use them in your work. Thanks to CD2H for hosting this webinar, and thanks also to my colleague Lisa O'Keefe, who is moderating the questions. So as I mentioned, talking over the previous slide, please share your questions in the chat, and I will answer some in real time if they'll help us in our discussion, if I can clarify something. But otherwise, as I mentioned, we've set aside time for Q&A at the very end of this webinar. So right now, let's take a quick pause before I go much further, and I'd like to take a poll. So we will launch that. So let us know, this is about potential use cases and personas. Please let us know if you're currently creating or developing any of these following types of services or tools at your institution, either software tools or projects, educational materials, communication materials, job descriptions. And we'll take just a minute for your answers to come in. Okay, thank you everyone for voting. We're seeing some interesting numbers there. So it looks like the largest amount of the responses we got is for communication materials. Very many people are involved in those. So we got 12 out of 17 respondents. Lots of people working on job descriptions and a similar amount on software projects. And then finally, educational materials with about half of you roughly involved. So hopefully you're seeing those results with me. That is good to know. So we really hope that personas are going to be a good resource that can help you in all of these different efforts. And we'll try and show today how we can help bring that about. I'm sharing the results with you. I think you have seen just really quickly. And now I'll stop that share. And we can take down the poll and move on with our presentation. Okay. And also, before we really begin, I'd like to point out the link to the GitHub IO page for personas. And this page contains all the materials that you'll need to get started. So if you see that, it's in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. And the website is data2health.github.io/cts-personas/pages/profiles. So that will take you directly to a page where you can look at and download persona profiles. We will take a tour through this website in a few minutes as one of the latter portions of today's presentation. But also, please feel free to look it over earlier if you'd like. All right, so our goals for today, what we would like to do is examine the goals, the methods, the deliverables of the Personas project. So this will include a little bit of information about the project team and our goals, how we chose the elements of an effective persona profile, how we identified translational roles to profile, how we researched those roles, the design elements of the final profile documents, and then finally, our deliverables, and that will be the tour of our CTS Personas GitHub IO site that I mentioned. the very beginning, I'd like to talk about what were our motivations for undertaking the Personas project. So one of the needs of the CTSAs that was recognized by the CD2H was that no defined list of translational workforce roles existed. So needing to know who our tools users were was having an effect on software development projects and on the development of educational and other types of tools. And understanding the needs and the motivators of the translational workforce is essential for developing resources for education and career development, for supporting evaluation and continuous improvement efforts, for fostering good team science, and for cultivating meaningful partnerships across translation. So what I'm showing in this slide here, this was created by Northwestern University's CD2H PI, Christy Holmes, and it shows how this problem was phrased and presented as a proposed phase 2 project for the CD2H. It also outlines our solutions for tapping into users' needs, and that was to define specific roles in translational science and describe them through a portfolio of persona profiles. When the project was approved, we assembled a team consisting of participants from Northwestern University, Oregon Health and Science University, Washington University in St. Louis, and the Children's Hospital Philadelphia. So the Clinical and Translational Science, or CTS Personas project, was given a 6-month time frame, and this time frame really helped our team to hone in on some very specific goals. We aim to profile a dozen roles across CTS and create supporting materials such as sample use cases that show how to use the personas, and also a user guidebook. So as a background for our discussion of our procedures, let's look at a completed profile first. So here I'm showing the profile for our biostatistician, and this is a 1-page document that contains a wealth of information about the role that a biostatistician plays in the CTSA environment. A common recommendation that we found for creating personas is to give them traits that personalize them. And you can see those traits here towards the top of the screen. And these would be the first 4 elements, basically, in these numbered elements. So we've got the name of this persona, a photo, a quote that kind of encapsulates their philosophy, their approaches, and a descriptive job title. So our biostatistician is Associate Professor of Biostatistics. And this humanizing is really important because personas stand in for real people. So the personalization makes their needs more genuine and more urgent to service developers and those who are using personas as a guide. The other elements you can see listed here are also key to personas users and service developers because they provide essential background information about the work experience, the wants, and the needs of the people who will use your tools. So on the left in this gray section is a biography, and this covers the persona's education, their years of experience, some details about their job responsibilities, and information about workplace mobility, such as do they have the ability to work remotely. The sections on the right go into detail about each persona's goals, their needs, their motivators, and even their pain points. The persona's software usage and their proficiency levels is noted. And finally, we cover for each persona their scholarly outputs and also their professional development habits and needs. So the end result is a full portrait of a professional that demonstrates both their strengths and areas where they could use additional help or support, which can come in the form of services. So the 15 elements we chose to focus on that you could see in that previous slide, they were not a pre-formulated set. The concept of personas comes ultimately from the world of software user experience or UX design. So to find some commonly used personas elements, we researched popular UX websites. Sources like UX Magazine, the European Bioinformatics Institute, and usability.gov were really helpful for this effort. We took elements from sources like these and mapped them to each other so we could see which elements were the most commonly used. And then we discussed which elements would be most useful in a biomedical context for biomedical roles. So in the end, we came up with the list of 15 elements that you saw in the profiles as seen here in this slide. So the next step in our process was to choose the dozen CTS jobs that we would have the bandwidth to profile within the 6-month time frame of the project. So we took a very stepwise approach to identifying and selecting roles, as you can see outlined in this slide. First, we scoured the CTSA organizational charts and their staff websites across all CTSAs, and from that, we identified 79 unique positions. We found job descriptions for each of those roles, and we used natural language processing techniques to identify clusters of terms from the descriptions. So our goal here was to find the most commonly occurring terms because we believed that those would demonstrate key employment focuses currently in the CTSAs. Then we took those terms and we grouped the job titles that we found into clusters around them. So those are kind of quantitative approaches we took to analyzing this data. And then our next steps were a bit qualitative in that our team voted on the jobs in each cluster that we believed were the most important to profile in this initial batch of the dozen personas. And we agreed to profile the top 12 roles resulting from our voting, so the top 12 that got the most votes. In addition, we aimed to create 2 patient profiles. And these we generated in a wholly qualitative way, building from our experience based on patients we had worked with or known who would be likely patients of an academic health center or another CTSA institution. So here are the results of our voting. These are the 12 roles that we profiled for CTS personas. As you can see from this list, we were eager to profile roles across the entire spectrum of translation, from basic science to preclinical and clinical research to community implementation. It was important to us to include roles with a great amount of public interaction, such as the patient navigator and the community engaged researcher. We also wanted to include a good sampling of roles that support translational science at all levels and in all parts of the translational ecosystem. So you see we've included roles like the clinical research coordinator and the research administrator, the data analyst and the biostatistician, and roles like developers who build the databases and the other code-based solutions that help us get our work done in translational science. So with our roles chosen, we then followed a similar stepwise approach to researching and filling out our profile templates. We got important background information for our personas from published literature and from internet resources, but also following the best practices recommended by the UX world for creating personas, we decided to conduct interviews with people working in the 12 positions in order to really fully understand their jobs, their responsibilities, and their day-to-day concerns. So first, we developed interview questions tailored to help us complete those profile templates. And we sourced our questions from sources like the UX websites. We made an IRB application, and when we got our determination, we conducted the interviews with a goal of 3 per role. We de-identified the interviews, transcribed them, analyzed the data we found, and then we created draft versions of our templates to combine all this data with the information we learned from the literature. Then, based on all this information, the persona profiles were created. For the patients, we used only internet and literature resources rather than interviews. So now that we had all this data collected, it was time to write the personas, essentially by distilling the information we found and fitting it into the template elements we'd agreed on. But writing personas is more than just writing. Finding the proper design and layout for a good persona template was also really key. So we went through a few different iterations before we honed in on the design that you see here. We looked at modern day resumes, UX personas websites, and various other templates we found online. And I could recommend, if you're interested in creating your own personas based on our procedures, it would be a good idea to recruit someone with graphic design knowledge or really good graphic design sensibilities to your team so you can make your personas as visually appealing as possible. Keep in mind things like the color palettes you'd like to use, font sizes, having a good alternation between text and images and blank space. And also, on a practical note, I'd recommend that you allow for multiple rounds of revisions and garner some feedback from a team or from a sample of your persona's intended users. And some other practical tips is that it's very important to choose names for the personas that could not be confused with a celebrity or other well-known person, as that can be distracting. And it's also helpful to use stock photos, or again, images that cannot be confused with a real person. We use the website thispersondoesnotexist.com, and that is an AI-based generator that creates realistic human faces that are based on no actual person. So now, to wrap up our kind of tour quickly through the project, I would like to take a tour through the website, the CTS Personas GitHub IO site, to show you all of our deliverables and how you can access them. So if everyone can bear with me a second, I will stop sharing slides, and we're going to switch over to the website. Also, I'm taking a brief look at the chat. Okay, I think we're all right. I'm not seeing questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share now the website. All right, so here we are. This is the homepage of the CTS Personas GitHub IO site, and it shows everything that's available for your use right now for the project. So this includes information about our team, the persona profiles themselves, and also a link to the user guidebook, sample use cases, an FAQ page, and links to ways that you can provide feedback. And please do check out those links in particular. We're eager to hear what you think. And then finally, at the bottom of this page, we have a 2-minute introductory video on the personas. And this is a quick and engaging way to become acclimated for those who are new to the project. Okay, so hopefully as we're following along, whoops, I'm going to stop the share for a second, and I'm going to share the wrong thing there. I'm going to share, let's see, my Firefox. Let's see, and Lisa, are there any questions as we're kind of going through?
No, we're all quiet so far, Sarah, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Let's see. Looking at, there we go, here's Firefox. Okay, so here we're taking a look at that homepage again. And let's go ahead and actually click into a profile, one of the first interesting things we can see here. So you see we have them all listed. We've got the 12 workers in CTS and then also our 2 patients at the bottom. So let's click into our developer, Eli Daniels. And what I'm showing here is what you can see on each persona's profile link. You can look at the whole profile in your browser, and here I've got Eli's profile expanded. And you can also download from this screen. And then, just beneath the profile, as you'll see what I'm scrolling to here, hopefully you see a little kind of donut-shaped graphic, and this shows the software usage of this persona. And this was extra information that we gleaned from our research, the research we gathered on each persona, that was a little bit more than we could fit on those one-page profiles. So what we were hoping to achieve here, we wanted to show the specific software programs that people are using. So you can see that in the kind of outer ring of this graphic. And then also we wanted to show broad categories of software that people are using, which you can see in the inner ring. And each of the CTS worker persona profiles has the same graphic. So again, these are specific programs and broad categories of software programs being used in translational science. And we wanted to include this information because we thought it would be really relevant to those using personas specifically to guide software development projects. So you can see that in every profile. And then now, I'll say a word or two about our user guidebook. So the user guidebook is a very big file, so I actually did not link that directly from the IO site, but this link will take you to the institutional repository for Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine called Digital Hub, and here you can download the Personas user guidebook. So this guidebook contains a bit more in-depth exploration of the profiles, again, more that we could include in individual profile documents. And it includes these explorations, a bibliography of our resources on the project, some cross-persona analyses that, again, go into a bit more depth than was really possible in individual profiles. And finally, some sample use cases, which demonstrate potential ways in which you can put the personas to use to work for your institution. And heading back to the IO site, oops, I can show you as well that we have pulled the use cases out and included them as separate documents here on the IO site. So you can access those right away in case you'd find those most useful. So we've got the three use cases as you can see on the sample use case page. Number one is about an end-to-end patient platform. The second one is about clinical research centered trainings. And the third is about building the software development team. So let's take a quick look. In this first use case, we're employing the personas in a scenario of building an end-to-end patient platform website. And at the bottom here in the kind of gray box, we outline real people's needs that they might have from such a website as seen through the eyes of these personas. So patients, like Tom here at the top, use the platform to schedule their appointments and to monitor their health information. And patient navigators, like Alice, use the platform in the same way to assist their clients. And then various types of administrators and researchers, the other kind of four personas here, they might need to download, say, de-identified information from this patient platform website to inform their research or to offer improved services to their patients. So each persona is coming at this tool from a different angle, and by reading their profiles, you can get to know some of their very distinct needs that they might have in relation to this tool. Then use case 2 revolves around a center administrator being played by our persona Carmen. And this administrator is developing a clinical research center training schedule. So using the personas encourages thinking about who takes the training classes and what their particular needs and their skill levels are. Also, the profiles tell us that some professionals want to take classes that are outside their wheelhouses in order to become better informed and better collaborators with their teammates. So things that you would learn specifically from reading the profiles we've made and based on our data is that the data analyst wants to take a statistics workshop so that he can kind of have a little bit of information about making the reports he's generating or the data he's finding maybe a bit more useful to the biostatistician a few steps down the road in the project. And likewise, the clinical research coordinator wants to take a Python class because data wrangling is a part of her role, as mentioned in her profile, and she wants to become more proficient at it. And also, the data analyst, the librarian, and the biostatistician are all interested in good clinical practices classes, again, to help them be better collaborators, to help them anticipate PI's needs. So finally, use case 3, which I've got here, and again, all of these are available for download from this site, just as the profiles were. In use case 3, we're examining a kind of human resources and team building use case. And here, we're examining how administrators and supervisors can use the personas to see what their potential employees might be looking for in a job at a CTSA. So a developer who's inspired to work in an academic health center, for example, might have very different goals and motivators than a developer who's looking for a job in the commercial sphere. And these, again, are some of the goals and motivators we learn about specifically from reading the developer Eli's profile. So administrators can use this knowledge, the kind of motivators of a developer in the CTSA world, to tailor the job descriptions and the hiring procedures more specifically and to make them a better fit for these potential employees' needs. So that is a quick tour of the sample use cases. And then now, let's take a look at the FAQs. So on this page, I really want to point out the various ways in which you can share feedback with us on this project, because again, we're extremely eager to hear it. So firstly, as I mentioned, you have access to all of our project documentation, both on this IO page and on the main CTS Personas GitHub site, which is linked here. You can submit an evaluation of the Personas project through this linked Google form. And also, you're very welcome to contribute any thoughts or observations on this project straight to our GitHub issues page by creating a new issue. And you're welcome to contribute some very specific items, such as additional sample use cases, questions, or even some new personas. And then finally, this last part of the FAQ page here, this last question. A key role is missing from the personas library. What can I do? So something we anticipated as being a common question about this project is why particular roles that people might have liked to see profiled have not been profiled. So I hope my explanation of our procedure of how we chose roles explained how we ended up with the role choices that we did. But nevertheless, we know that many roles you might like to see have not been profiled. So for this reason, we're providing a methodology section, which I'll click into here. And here, much like the content we've heard today and what I've outlined, I've outlined the step-by-step process that we employed to create our profiles. And I'm even including our full profile element list, which you can see here, and also our full list of the interview questions that we used for the project. So we definitely encourage you to make your own profiles, even using these exact materials and methods. And if you would like, please share them back to the project through a GitHub issue or through the feedback mechanisms I mentioned before. So finally, I will just go specifically to the feedback section of our page. So I'm repeating a little bit of what I mentioned before. You can submit GitHub issues and also take the evaluation. And then a final feedback method I'll mention, and something that will make communication easier if you'd like to be more involved in personas, is to onboard with the CD2H. And I've included the link here for those who are not already onboarded, so please do take advantage of that. Okay, so that is all for the presentation portion of our discussion today on personas. So now I'd like to open it up to questions, or if there's anything you'd like to ask me directly, please go ahead and unmute, and we've got the rest of our time for discussion and questions.
Sarah, I'll let you know when a question comes through chat.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Sarah, I got one in my direct messages, and it is, can you tell us more about your process for the template design?
Yes, absolutely. So let's see, I will stop sharing here and I'll actually go back to my slideshow, which is admittedly more of a visual cue. But yes, I can go into a little bit more detail about that. So here up in the slides, I mentioned in this portion that we looked at different websites to gain information about the elements that you can use to make a persona profile template. So it's important to keep in mind, as you saw with the one-page documents, that it is really possible when creating personas that you might have more information than you can really distill into a one-page document. The research methods we chose specifically were so robust and resulted in such a good lot of information that it was almost difficult to distill it down. So that's why we looked over the elements that we found in resources like this very carefully. As I said, I was interested to map element lists from one resource to another, or from examples of personas we found online to each other, to see which ones are being used most frequently. And that's why I mentioned the personalization elements as being so very important to a project like this, because again, the personas will stand in for actual people who will be using the tools, and the personalized elements just help developers or others creating services remember that the tool, the service, really should serve real people, and therefore have the greatest amount of usability possible, greatest ease of use, greatest accessibility possible. So that being said, that's some of the constants we saw across many different types of profiles, those personalization elements. And the other profile elements, they can really kind of be more or less up to you. They could be very different from sort of discipline to discipline. Sometimes they're extremely project-centric, meaning that actually the traditional way personas are usually developed is almost in relation to a particular project, or if you're making a database, that type of thing, you might create your personas as specific users of just that tool. So if that is your goal, if you need to create personas for one specific project, then those elements will be directly relatable to that tool. We were trying to create personas that could be used for multiple different projects across CTSAs. So that's why we went with a kind of more or less generic selection of elements that we did use. Very general things like software usage, their experience, their educational levels. Those are the kind of things that you'd be interested to know across many different roles, and they're sort of mappable across roles as well. So that's how we ended up with the exact elements we went with.
Great, thanks, Sarah. We have some questions from our guests. I'm going to start in order. Prabhu, thank you for attending. Prabhu asks or says, change is inevitable. Are there tools available to automatically update personas by extracting content from a resume or CV?
Oh, that is a great question. That's something, it's kind of an idea that's been on our horizon that if we're able to continue this project maybe into phase 3, or if we're just able to find additional time to devote some work to it, we were thinking about doing something like kind of normalizing data points across the personas. So kind of picking out the elements that again are occurring over and over, or even sort of values within those elements, if you will, that are occurring over and over. And kind of make them machine processable in a way, so it would give us a good analysis method. So that being said, yes, if a certain persona had, say, an update to their job, would we want to actually change the profile, make it read a little bit differently, change the values of some of those elements, so to speak? Right now, there is no kind of mechanized or computational way to do that. We would have to do it manually. But that being said, if we're able to kind of do a little bit more computational analyses and computational approaches to the project a little bit later, we can definitely let you know. I think that would be kind of an exciting enhancement we might be able to offer.
Great, thanks. Are we ready for the next question, Sarah?
Yeah.
Great. So Trish Pruis, thanks Trish for attending, says, our hub recently did some work on identifying target audiences, which included some personification work. The personas presented here are very helpful. Thank you. Oh, it wasn't a question, it was a compliment. Thank you, Trish. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you very much, Trish. I appreciate it.
And then following up, there's a question from Jennifer Westrick. Hi, Jennifer. Saying, can you give us some examples of these personas in use, success stories, in other words?
Yes, so we've got some burgeoning success stories that we're collecting up just now, and I have not written them up in a way to kind of, make a blog post or anything quite public about it yet, but yeah, success stories are beginning to crop up all over the place, and perhaps to toot our own horn a little bit, I can actually quote you one that's coming directly from projects that Northwestern is involved in, and also through the CD2H. Those of you who are in CD2H might have heard about our development on the Invenio project, which will be a new institutional repository solution. And our developer, when he learned about the personas we're working on, actually took a couple of them immediately and applied them to a problem that we have that we're examining right now as we develop this database. And that problem revolved around permission levels of different users in this database. And that's because we're going to implement what we hope will be a very nice feature, a kind of proxy feature. So meaning that anyone could assign proxy ownership of their record that they might be depositing to anybody else. So we thought a common use case might be that, say, a PI might want something deposited, a data set, something like that, and they might assign their proxy to, say, an administrator, someone assisting them in their project. So that's all well and good, that works out well, but then we have to examine what happens, say, if the PI leaves and the person they assign their proxy to stays. What happens to the permission levels there? Should the person who's assisting them still have ownership over that record? Or what's the protocol? So just examining personas helped us think about that, specifically from the point of view of the software expertise and kind of comfort levels of these different personas as they're using these tools. So for instance, if you read the profile for our clinical research coordinator, you'll see that that is one of the profiles that uses one of the largest amount of kind of software as a service services and websites. They use a lot of these things on behalf of PIs. They're kind of doing that all the time. So, and that's what we found through our research. So they're very comfortable with kind of reading over these websites' terms of use, their agreements, knowing exactly what they're agreeing to, if they're signing up for a certain permission level on this or that record. They're a little bit more used to dealing with these things. And the PIs, at the same time, if you examine some of our researchers and their software charts, you'll see that they did not report quite so much usage of these kind of websites where you might be gathering or depositing data, software as a service solutions, et cetera. They're just not doing it quite as often, or their focus has to be elsewhere. So a question arises, do they understand things like assigning proxy to the same level or in quite the same way that an administrator, a lab manager, someone in that role might? So that's really important to consider. And what does that do for us in our software project in Invenio? Well, it makes us think a bit again about usability. So knowing that there's differences in the understanding level about this kind of scenario, how can we, as the developers of the software tool, meet that need, kind of meet people where they are. So do we have kind of visual cues? Maybe if you're working through your profile, you can see records you deposited, ones that you assigned your proxy on, ones on which you're a proxy for somebody else. How can we visually let you know what you're looking at? Differentiate it so that you understand the permission levels. Can we provide help language in help pages? That type of thing. Or are these concepts maybe a little bit difficult enough to grasp that you would need to actually talk to a repository manager and have mediated deposit? All these things are possible, but again, what kind of got those thoughts flowing and our kind of wheels turning about this is examining the persona profiles, having them stand in for the real users and show us, the ways we're going to kind of work through these problems for a real solution. So that's one thing I can point to.
Cool, thanks. I have a couple more questions for you, Sarah. From Christy Holmes. Hi, Christy. Christy says, how do you think the relatively short project time influenced the choices you made? Would you have made different choices with a longer project, say 2 years versus 6 months?
Oh, yes. So hi, Christy. Thank you. Great question. So definitely the 6-month time frame of the project did influence our choices. As I mentioned, we wanted to make sure that we were including profiles that really showed the breadth and depth of translational science. So we did, as we were kind of voting and thinking over which roles to profile, were we covering the entire spectrum of translation? Did we have a good mixture of roles that might be a bit more behind the scenes and ones that might be more involved in the community? We took all these matters very seriously into account. So if there were a longer time frame, we definitely would have done the same 12 we initially did, I believe, but also we would have included more roles that might fill in some of the gaps that you might be imagining as you look over those 12 and think, well, I can see a role there that's not quite represented, or one that's related to a clinical research coordinator, but not quite. So we're definitely mindful of those. And again, that's why we love to hear about them through the GitHub issues, or any kind of feedback through any of the mechanisms you might like to share. So yeah, we're definitely aware of others that fill a great and important role in CTS, and with a longer time period, we would have done those as well.
Great. It looks like we have about 20 minutes for questions, and Leslie has been very patiently waiting for theirs. So Leslie's question for you, Sarah, is, I understand the use cases, I think, and that I could use personas to ensure that my software application will meet the needs of varied users. We run a research networking system that has profiles of our researchers and their publications and expertise. Has there been any discussion about how to use the personas to supplement a research networking system? It's a bit of a twist on your use cases and could be a way to add programmers to a research networking system and highlight their skills and motivations. Thanks, Leslie, for your question.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. So that's a good question, and what it immediately makes me think of is, especially looking at the kind of scholarly output sections that each of the personas has. You mentioned like bringing the developers into that system, and I think that makes a lot of sense. We're really eager to include that section of the scholarly outputs for absolutely every persona, and there were some for whom we didn't say too many things. If we had a bulleted list of all the scholarly outputs, some had maybe one bullet. It was, very smaller amounts for some versus others. But that's not to say that there are not scholarly outputs or kind of research outputs, work outputs that every one of the personas might like to share in some capacity. So we want them to feel included and engaged with by systems like that. So we hope that something like the persona profiles would just help bring to everyone's mind the fact that everyone has some kind of work output that they would probably like to share, bring to the light of the greater community for recognition, and also just to let others in the community know what they're able to do. Maybe bring some skills to light, ways that people's skills can be, have greater use made of them, and just really help the entire ecosystem a bit more effectively. So that's definitely a good way to think about it. And then, in terms of a tool like that as well, if that's the type of tool that, say, we might still have a similar situation like the one I outlined with Invenio of multiple stakeholders needing to access it and what their different access levels are. And how that tool can be designed to best serve everyone and reduce confusion, so everyone understands what you agree to when you deposit something, when you agree to be someone's proxy, if you're the downloader or kind of secondary user of some of that information. What are you agreeing to? What are you seeing when you enter the system? So I believe that examining all the persona roles really in relation to a system like that, and just imagining how would they use it if they were someone, you know, actively contributing, if they were harvesting information from it, how would they use it? So these are all kind of things we can get at when we look at the specific of their profiles, from software use to their motivators to responsibilities in their everyday jobs.
Great, thanks. Does anyone else have a question or comment that they would like to share? It's looking like we're quieting down a little bit, Sarah.
Well, okay, that's all right. I was very happy to see the poll results today. Curious to know about the different projects people are working on. If anyone likes to share about that, we'd be happy to hear. I'm seeing a message from Connor in the chat.
We do have extras.
Yes. So I don't know if everyone attending today or people who might have seen our GitHub IO site are aware. We did offer some trading cards. We had those printed out a few weeks ago. We had them with us at the CTSA fall meeting and gave them away, and they were a big hit. So these are small trading card, you know, baseball card sized little cards that have each persona's kind of picture and name on the front, and then sort of quick stats on the back, just like a baseball card. Basically, little snippets pulled out of the portions of their persona profiles, so some of those elements. We do have a limited supply still available. We did not get them all away yet. So we can offer trading cards to anyone who is interested. The first early respondents, I think, will have enough. So.
Well, it looks like everyone is either getting ready for lunch or feeling filled with knowledge after your presentation, Sarah.
Well, either way, I think that's great. And those are getting ready for lunch. Have a great one. But yeah, thank you so much for listening today. As I mentioned, we've got all those feedback mechanisms open. So of course, please feel free to get in touch with us at any time. We're always available. The Personas team loves talking personas, so please send us your questions at any time. And we'd be very eager to read those and to get back to you. And I should also mention that after today's presentation, we'll share the recording and slides. And then also, we will send a little bit of an extra email to everybody just to follow up. So that will have the information I talked about, and you can share your feedback with us through that follow-up. So be on the lookout for that email.
Great.
But, great. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, Lisa, I think we're about ready. So thank you all.
Thanks to everyone for attending, and thank you, Sarah, for a great hour.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.